minutes. We can start and do the presentation, come back and do the minutes at the end.
That'd be fine. Okay, let's go ahead and start.
Somebody might have just come. Might have 4 here in just a second.
Yep.
Today?
Good, how are you?
Yep.
I'm April.
Board.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
Good. We can do it then.
Yeah, we can.
Sounds good. Well, good morning, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. Do we need to do introduction? How about let's do introductions,
Yeah.
Chris?
Yeah.
Okay.
You want to start? Or
I'm fine. Jim Michaelis,
Brent Tobler.
Brent, Joe Gordon.
April Nelson.
Mike Whimpey.
Mike was just appointed by the council last city council meeting.
Oh, good.
To replace
Good.
Casey Shaw.
How can you replace Casey?
Well,
It's big shoes to fill, but they let me in the front. There was a cone in front of the door. I got it.
Chris Tschirki, Public Works Director.
John Dorny, Horrocks Engineers.
Morley.
Let's go around back here.
My name's Tyler Peay, work for the city of Orem here.
Reed Price, also with Public Works.
Well, just tell what section you're in too, or
I'm the Assistant Public Works Director, and I'm responsible for the city's water resources, water, sewer, and stormwater.
Sam Kelly, City of Orem, City Engineer.
Thayne Carter, Fleet Manager, Orem City.
Jim Moore, Parks.
Steggell, Streets.
Giles, Demke, Water Reclamation.
Sabey, Stormwater.
so this is our Public Works leadership team.
Of course, good. All right. Let's go ahead and approve the minutes. Is there a motion to approve February 14th minutes? Don't everybody speak all at once. Okay, we have a motion. We have a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All right. I guess we'll turn it over to
John Dorny.
John Dorny
and Sam
and
Kelly.
Sam.
There'll be John and Sam have been developing an update on our transportation master plan over the last several months, and this will be going to City Council here coming up in the next couple of weeks, I believe, for final adoption. So we're excited to hear about the updates, and we'll turn the time over to John.
Any introduction, Sam? Are you good?
Go ahead, John.
All right. Sam and I have done this dog and pony show for a few times. We've presented to the Orem Technical Advisory Committee, Transportation Advisory Committee, the City Council, and the Planning Commission. So this is another version of that presentation to you. I only have about 17 slides, so it's not too long here.
We only have 50 minutes, so.
Yeah. So the difference between a full redo and an update is that we didn't change every single thing, but we did update data collection. You have an extensive data collection process here at the city of Orem. Not every city has that, so we used Taylor Forbush's count, base traffic counts. We updated that from 2015. We looked at roadway level of service. It's calculated a little bit different than intersection level of service. We looked at a fresh look at your road cross sections. You know, how many lanes, how much park strip, what's the curb and gutter look like, what's the right of way width. If you remember the State Street Master Plan, the original version of State Street had some neighborhood density districts with higher densities, and in the middle of this update there was an election, and so that changed that. So we went back to the original State Street non-high density transit corridor type density. So that, if that's a question, we've updated that. The travel demand model has a new version out from 2040 to 2050 since 2015. MAG also has their 2050 plan done, and we updated your capital improvement plan. So there's, in the transportation master plan process, there's high level and there's detailed. And so we did a high level. The WFRC and MAG travel demand model, there's a high regional analysis. We look at roadway and intersection level of service based on daily volumes. A detailed level is when you get into the traffic study, you get into turn pocket lengths, you get into a lot of details for specific corridors and intersections, and that's typically done on a project level. Again, a little bit about the process. The travel demand model, as you can see in the upper left, goes from Payson to Ogden, and that's why we call it high level, because the model, when we run it, it takes 8 hours at night, and we run the model and say, what's going on in Orem? And so we take this high-level model that spans the whole Wasatch Front, and we customize it for Orem, and we adjust population, we adjust employment, zoning. Those are just about, you know, eight things or so of about 15 or 20 things we look at. We try to customize it since the analysis has to go from Payson to Ogden. They look at Orem with a certain scale. So we have to go in and adjust traffic analysis zones, and we'll talk about that, and fine tune it so that it represents Orem a little bit better. We run that model again with Orem customization. We run the model again, look at the output, create a document. What does the model say is needed? We review that with staff. Again, we've gone to OTAC. We look at the general plan. We discuss with administrators. We present to different council members. We get some public input. Again, we've gone to the Planning Commission, City Council, OTAC. Now we're at PWAC, so we're ready for adoption. Again, we gathered counts. There's a legend there. You can kind of see anything in green Orem already had. Red we gathered ourselves, and then we also did ADT, so there are 24-hour tube counts along the roadways in purple. So you can see we did an extensive count task, and what that does is it lets us establish a baseline. If the model says there's 5,000 cars a day on a road, and we go count it, and there's really 6 or there's really 3, then we adjust the model to account for that. It's your calibration method. And with everything, there's a conflict between mobility and land and access. So freeways have an access, an interchange every mile or two. State Street has an access every 30 feet, right? And so there's twice as much traffic on the freeway, but it flows, than State Street, but State Street's backed up because of the friction, the access. And so UDOT wants to move cars, landowners, business owners want access because they want access to their property. So you're constantly fighting mobility and access. And so the higher the mobility, the more freeway arterials are next, and collectors and local roads. And so what happens is you have access management standards that say you can only have a driveway every 600 feet, or you can have an intersection signal every quarter mile. You can see, I use State Street, I know it's a state route, but or even 1600 North, which is also now a state route, but you have driveways right on a 4 or 5 lane arterial. You've got accesses very often, and you don't, you know, and Center Street is a center turn lane, and so State Street's an example. University Parkway is a little bit more restricted, and so we try to apply these roadway classifications throughout the city on based what's out there existing, and also what we want it to be in the future. So if you see an access category where we're calling it an arterial, and we want certain standards, we know it might maybe not fit it now, but it's something that they're working towards. As development comes in, they'll try to modify access and spacing. Again, we looked at your existing road network. We itemized signals, roundabouts. There's some Hawk signal crossings in there. This is just the existing network as of when this was printed. You've heard the term level of service. This is kind of a graphic of that. Free flow speeds. I think the level of service CD is where we're looking at. Typically D is acceptable. UDOT uses D, some cities use C, and so they try to run things a little bit less congested.
So if that's the desire, then we would need to adjust our models and so forth, and our final outputs would probably indicate widenings and things like that, so you wouldn't have as much congestion. Is that?
Yeah, like
what you're looking at?
Center Street in Orem, there's a debate. Do we widen it to get a level of service C, or we just deal with the traffic? Coming in from the freeway, you've got the high school, you've got the slope on the south or the north. Does that north side? You got businesses, and so when there's a discussion about widening Center Street, and that's kind of a hot topic, so you can see as you drive it what that would take to take 24 more feet to add lanes. And so is the city okay with maybe an E during peak time for a couple hours a day, or maybe shopping times? Or is it worth spending tens of millions of dollars to widen it to try to get a level of service D or C?
And to that point, that's the biggest fundamental shift in the update, was that from our TAC, they started to look at some of the projects, what the regional transportation plan had in there, and we're looking to move to a level of service E, trying to understand that we're getting to the point where we really can't keep building ourselves out of congestion. We end up with too many projects that we can't fund, and there's also a growing need to try and retain the characteristics of certain neighborhoods, and if we're widening them, then that starts to destroy it. So we're looking, there were some things that TAC came up with. One was lowering our level of service, and to John's point, we're not talking a congested level of service E throughout the day, but it's typically going to be during your peak times. Maybe that peak is a little bit extended. And then they also looked at, on a few previous slides there, the desire to have our maximum amount of lanes on any of our city streets to be 5, not looking to put in a 7-lane facility like we have on State Street that ends up dividing the whole community. We do have some plans. The one with Center Street, as John spoke to, where it's modeled to have 7 lanes from I-15 to State Street, but I mean, the amount of cost and the amount of disruption there would just, I think, be a detriment for the city. So those were some of the things that came from our Transportation Advisory Commission.
So you end up with what they call peak hour spreading. Typically, your peak commute time is 4 to 6 p.m. and 7 to 9 a.m. and you end up getting that from 3:30 to 6:30, and it's called a peak hour spread, where the congestion gets worse for a little bit of time, but for the other 21 hours of the day, it's okay. And so is it worth it? We're working on the point of the mountain where the prison used to be, and they've already implemented level of service E just from the beginning. They're like, we'll accept level of service E now. And so that's kind of where we're at with that. And this represents roadway segments. And how they calculate that level of service is how many lanes you have and how many trips are there per day, both directions. So this is an estimate that WFRC and MAG use that says, okay, if you have an arterial with certain access spacing, meaning less friction, and collectors with a little more friction, a 3-lane collector can take a little bit less traffic than an arterial because there's more accesses and more spacing and more turning getting in the way. And so this is how we come up with level of service. And I believe those numbers are failures. If you have a 3-lane arterial, a 3-lane means 1 north, 1 southbound, and then a lane in the middle, turning lane. If you have 15,200, then that would be at overcapacity. If you have a 4-lane arterial at 31,200, then 31,500 would be at overcapacity. So that's kind of what we use. And intersections use a little bit different scale. They use delay per second. So if you're at a light for 30 seconds, 50 seconds a minute, then they base that level of service D, and that's average. Sometimes cars get through with 0 delay, some sit there for 2 minutes, the average is 1 minute. So that's a calculation that's done through the highway capacity manual. This is what we estimated the existing level of service to be based on those volumes and types. You can see 1600 North, now that's a UDOT facility up in red. 800 North, State Street, University Parkway, this is what we're saying is level of service, poor level of service now. We'll talk a little bit more about improvements here. So this is just a process of how we run the model. We talked a little bit about taking the existing travel model, adjusting it to Orem standards. We look at existing capacities and then we run it for the future. We come up with future volumes. So we kind of look at existing, what Orem wants to do, what the future model says, and then we look at future capacities. These are the TAZ zones. This is where I was talking about MAG and WFRC. They have a lot larger zones for Orem, and I compare them to pixels. The more smaller pixels you have on a TV, the better quality it is because you can get much more detail. The larger the TAZs you have, the worse data you get, and so we went in and we added TAZs to Orem City, which is a traffic analysis zone, similar to a zoning map, but it's a traffic one. So the more smaller zones we have, the more complicated it is, but the more detail and the better accuracy we can have. And so MAG doesn't get that much detail because of the expanse they have to look at. You can see some of those TAZs are 3,000, 2,600, 3,000. And so when you go across the whole valley, it's thousands and thousands of these zones.
What do those numbers represent?
Those numbers are just strictly zone numbers. They're not traffic or anything, it's the identifier zone. So if you go to Ogden, there might be a 2,812. It's just a number. So what we did is a 2030, 2040, 2050. If we did nothing, didn't build anything, that's what the no build means. The level of service shows up in red, meaning the level of service E or worse. And so you've got 8 North Canyon, State Street, Center Street in Orem here. You do have the college, what is that, 12th West / College Drive. You've got 8th East, a little bit of University Parkway. So if we did nothing, those roadways in theory would be over capacity or congested.
In Center Street, the recommendation is to do nothing?
No, that's not a recommendation. This is just if we do nothing, this is what it'll look like in 10 years. Or
Sam mentioned earlier that the thought was maybe we wouldn't build it to 7 lanes, so it would stay. In other words, we wouldn't do anything on Center, so it'll fail.
Yeah. And technically, you might go out there now and it's failing. I mean, when I drive into Orem on Center Street, you know, it just takes time, and if you're over a minute or so per light, you're considered failing. So you just have to decide if you want to.
Right. So is the level service then representative of a peak time or several hours of the day, or what does that represent?
So this is based off of roadway level of service, and so this basically has to do with the ADT per day and the size of the road. Now, when you get into that micro analysis that I mentioned earlier, the master plan is it's much more expensive and much more time consuming to look at every intersection. So what happens is the city will identify places and say, okay, we want to focus on this and kind of do subsequent studies. Or if a developer comes in and they want to focus on a certain intersection, Sometimes corridor studies are done, where we'll go all the way from Geneva Road to University Avenue and say, okay, let's look closer at the Center Street corridor, and let's do a corridor study, because that gets into the peak hour simulation, and it's too much effort on a master plan to get into the intersection micro simulation level. But this identifies what corridors we should probably be looking at.
And what happens if you develop mass transit better?
So the idea is that transit takes about 2 to 5% of the cars off the road. So if you have 40,000 cars a day on State Street, you're talking 2,000-3,000 cars a day. 10% would be 3,000, 4,000, so half of that. So it's not a huge reduction. And it's usually only on major corridors. You're not going to get transit, except for bus.
That's what I mean, is bus.
Yeah, okay. So if you're talking State Street mass transit, you're talking light rail or BRT, like you have on Parkway, that's different than a busing system.
Yeah.
But the model takes into account on routes that have bus routes. So if we know that there's a bus route or BRT, then we modify the model to account for that. And that's where, on the State Street districts where they were high density, when you had high density housing and there was transit, it would reduce trips on State Street. But when you don't put high density transit type development in transit, it changes the traffic a little bit. So we originally, from the State Street study, modified the model to account for it. And again, with the election, they said, no, don't put that in anymore. So we switched it back to the non-transit friendly land uses on State Street.
How does the analysis consider inputs from surrounding communities like Vineyard, Provo, like 8th North, Center Street, all have a big impact on traffic coming in on the boundary?
So when we
How's
run the
that
model, traffic doesn't care about boundaries, right?
Right.
And so it includes Payson to Ogden, but we don't go into all the surrounding communities and do these TAZ subdivides. And so Orem gets a really good subdivide, but Vineyard is whatever MAG put in. So we do account for traffic from all the surrounding neighborhoods. I can't remember if we updated this version. The last version we did, we took a boundary around the city of Orem and said how much traffic passes through Orem and how much either stops or originates, and it was like 30%. But we did it on every single road that boundaries Orem, and so some of the roads were 30 or 40% of the traffic going through Orem never stopped in Orem or never originated from Orem. So you're accommodating 10 to 30% plus of traffic from other communities, if that makes sense. And that's an estimate. We didn't get license plate surveys or things, but we look at the traffic patterns. We look at where people are going. They're going to BYU. They're going to different places. And so some of the major routes through the city is as high as 30+% of pass-through traffic. Does that answer your question?
I guess in the end, do you do kind of a gut check, like, okay, Vineyard with all the growth outside of the model, what's happening in terms of development, high density, if another city or community has a master plan that's going to put a road, like the UDOT's expanding 8th North right now up around towards Linden.
Yep.
Does it accommodate or account for that?
Yeah, so part of the reason why we do a master plan is that these all get submitted to MAG and WFRC, and then they go in and they create their 2030, 2040, 2050 model and incorporate all those improvements and projects. And if you went, they don't have every project in every city because they're not all regional roads, but they do have them in the model the best they can. And so Vineyard, Linden, Provo, we're doing stuff in Farmington, and there's a Shepherd Lane, there's a West Davis corridor. All those things get put in based on the decade that they're going to estimate it to be in. And so we rely on MAG that's why we use MAG's model, is because they've done that work for the area and put in all these projects. And then we focus on Orem and say, okay, let's focus on this. So it accounts for whatever transportation process MAG has followed. So 2050 no build, if we were to do nothing between now and 2050, you get more red roads, more overcapacity, more congestion. As we talked about, what are we willing to put up with and do? If you look at 8th East, north of 8th South, it's red. And I believe those are all residential driveways. So the question is to the city, do we really want to take homes to widen that, or do we want to just suck it up for a couple hours? Do we really want to take massive amounts of land on Center Street? And a lot of these are UDOT facilities, but those are some of the decisions that Sam mentioned. Should we go to level of service E? And it's probably beyond this master plan. We're on the tail end of it, but it would require a big discussion with City Council and Planning Commission to say, do we want to change this entire thing? Because it affects, like when developers come in, they no longer have to do as much improvements because now you've lowered the bar. And so when we do a traffic study and it's level of service E typically, or if it's E or F, and the developer has to fix the roadway to bring it up to D or C, they would no longer have to do that. And so you have to hold the city and the public to the same standard. So by lowering that level of service E, it doesn't just affect, well, I guess you could, I was going to say it doesn't affect, it just affects the main corridors, but I guess you could do a hybrid where you could say anything arterial and above we accept level of service E. So you could probably do a version where you have level of service E in part of the city and D's in others. But a lot of people are going towards that. In California, they allow level of service F. It's just how, is it an F minus? Is it really bad? Or they say, okay, we know it's really bad, but if you do this development, you can only increase delay by 3 seconds average. So what can you do to get it back to an F plus instead of an F minus? And so that's kind of where they're at. I'm not saying we should go that way, but California is a 4-letter word, right? So, but this is what the model says. This is what all of our input and output, that if we don't do anything, that's what the gridlock would look like, or congestion. And so what we do is we take those maps and take the data and we come up with this improvement plan and say, we pick one of them, 1600 North needs to go to 5 lanes, or 8th East, 16 North to Center Street, widen to 5 lanes. This is based off of the current approved Orem cities, or City of Orem's standards. And this doesn't mean this is going to happen right away. This just means this is what the model says based on current parameters that needs to happen and needs to be done. There's UDOT facilities that are in red. The red and the blue and the green here don't have to do with level of service anymore. They're just ownership. So if it's a red circle or line, that's a UDOT responsibility. If it's blue, it's a MAG Orem issue. Right in the middle, the south bottom there, the 12th South 4th West Roundabout. That's a joint project with some MAG funding and matching with Orem. Lakeview Parkway. That's a MAG Orem project in the bottom left. You can see the red Geneva Road kind of also there. You've got 1600 West out there by Geneva, also west by the lake. That's an Orem City only project. Main Street down below, restriped to 3 lanes. An Orem City only project. So a lot of these you can get MAG funding if it's on the master plan, if it's on the regional road plan. MAG can help fund it. If it's not on the regional road plan, then it's got to be a city funding.
What's the timing on these projects?
I don't know if we put I don't think we did this map originally had the phase and the timing. So we put it in the text boxes instead of the color coding. So when you see a box and it says RTP Phase 1, RTP Phase 2, RTP Phase 3, that's the Regional Transportation Plan of MAG, and they include UDOT projects. And so it's every decade. Phase 1 is up to 2030. I think they're at 2031 or 32 now, but it's 2030, 2040, and 2050. So if you see RTP Phase 1, it's within the next 6 to 10 years. So we took the 2030, 2040, 2050,
Okay.
looked at all the projects, and then put all the projects onto one map. You can see the Center Street interchange is a UDOT issue, but we also have, right now, Center Street is shown to be done in Phase 2. So that would be 2040. So by approving this, that doesn't mean these things are going to be built. It just means that's what is needed. And each one of these takes time and matching funds. And so this doesn't mean it's a process to build. It means this is what is needed. If the city wants to make changes, they can do that. This master plan gets updated usually every 5 to 8 years to keep up with the changes. Any questions on this one? This just kind of looks at road classifications. You can see the color coding of the road segments in green and blue and yellow. 2, 3 lane collectors, arterials. This has to do with access management. You can see the signals, roundabouts. You can see intersection changes. So anything that has the yellow shield with the plus sign in there just means that the intersection is recommended to be changed, whether it's adding a turn lane, adding a signal, modifying a signal, or putting in a roundabout. It hasn't been determined, but this is basically what the city will look like in the future by 2050 as things get changed and modified. You can see the mouth of the canyon, those 2 intersections that are UDOT facilities. Those are going to struggle in the future. Ironically, a lot of it comes out of Heber. The Heber Valley is growing so much that those intersections up, the desire to go to the freeway affects that. And so each one of these has a story of why it's needed. So within the master plan, we adjusted access management standards. Again, that's the spacing between intersections. We have a traffic calming guideline, a toolbox, traffic impact study guidelines are updated. We looked specifically at the southwest street network area. We updated cost estimates. We came up with that capital improvement plan, which is the map that basically we put costs to this map as part of the capital improvement plan. That's all I got.
What are those costs?
They're in the document. Sam can provide that to anybody.
It's cheap,
And so this is just projected out in the next 10 to 20 years then?
Yeah. Yeah, it's 2050. Yeah. It's so far out there on some of the 2050s that things will change. It's
Yeah.
right-of-way preservation. If you know you want to do a roadway, there's not a lot of growth potential in Orem like there is Eagle Mountain or something.
Right.
So, the southwest and the west, is about the open area, but if you need to preserve right of way and say, okay, when a house comes up for sale, the 12th South 4th West roundabout, the Orem City bought a house, knowing that they're gonna need that. MAG has quarter preservation funds where you can go after and say, hey, if it's on the master plan, if it's in the MAG RTP, we wanna buy this property and preserve it. And so it's about planning for the future and not necessarily going out and just building these.
On your roundabouts, are you looking at multi-lane roundabouts, or are you just still single-lane roundabouts?
So the 12th South 4th West is multi-lane. It's a hybrid. Part of it has 2 lanes, part of it has 1 lane.
Right.
Based on the receiving. And so most of the new roundabouts, I don't know what they've done on the Murdoch Canal one, if that's a roundabout, but there are options for maximum of a 2-lane roundabout at different locations. Some of the ones we showed, some of the intersection modifications we didn't call out if it's going to be a signal or a roundabout, because that depends on right of way. But some of these yellow plus sign placards could be a roundabout, could be a signal. If it's on a major road, it would be a multi-lane. But we know that multi-lanes are sometimes confusing, a little bit scary, and so we take that with a grain of salt. We had the UVU roundabout, the 12th South. We had as almost a 3-lane roundabout, and then we were able to look at volumes and change things so it's not so impact to the driver. Spanish Fork dropped in a multi-lane 2+ in front of Walmart, up Highway 6, and it takes a little while to get used to it, but we're not against it, we're not a proponent of it, it's just whatever's needed.
Just a lot of training with it. Kind of like the training that happened when did that intersection there by UVU that was confusing to everybody for a long time, but now it seems to
The
flow
main
pretty
entrance
well.
roundabout?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of unique because it's so close to the parkway. You enter the roundabout and there's no time to think about it. You're there. And
Yeah.
they've modified that 2 or 3 times. I know when the Provo City Ice Rink put in the roundabout on Center Street, for their Center Street, the car went right through it, just launched up and over it. You can go to the internet and see roundabout crashes that just drive right over it. So we're cognizant of that. In Sparks, I used to work at the city of Sparks in Reno, and they had a 3-lane roundabout by the Shields put in, and it changes your thinking, it blows your mind on that. So we don't have anything that large or that big planned, and those kind of roundabouts take up so much land
Right.
that it's not available. So we typically go just with standard signal, but
So it appears that there's hundreds of millions of dollars of improvements that are being recommended. Do you have like a phasing plan or cost estimates or prioritization or?
yeah. This is broken out into a table
Okay.
by phases, and so it'll say, phase 1, these are needed, phase 2, these are the estimated costs. I don't have it with you though, but yeah.
And where does UDOT fit into that estimated costing?
So we just identify that if it's a UDOT road, that's not an Orem funding, and
It's not an Orem problem.
well, it's your city,
Yeah.
so you can decide, if UDOT wants to come in and do something and you don't want to do it, then you can negotiate that with UDOT. But from a funding standpoint, as we get you that sheet of funding, Orem is, when they match, it's like 6.67% of MAG projects funding. So, if you've got a $10 million project, your $600,000 would be your matching. And so when you see those numbers, don't feel like Orem's got to come up with those numbers. It's typically MAG matching, unless it's a green facility, which is not a MAG facility, it's just Orem City. And so there's funds and there's access to funds, and Orem doesn't fit the bill 100%. It's like under 7%.
Do we have an update on 16th North with UDOT from State Street to the freeway or to 12th West? I know that we purchased that, or we gave that to UDOT, and I think there was a $40 million bill that was passed or earmarked or designated for Orem for 16th North. Do we have an update on that one?
I haven't heard. The last I heard is that we're still looking at 2030 for that to be built.
2030?
I
Hopefully
can
they.
check, but
I
that's-
hope they fill the potholes before then.
Well, they actually did.
Man,
Yeah.
I hit one today.
Oh, did
It
you?
rattled my car pretty good.
Yeah.
Didn't see it.
I know when I presented to either the City Council or Plan Commission work session, UDOT was presenting right before us on that project, and we might have been in the room. So I think the last I heard was they're buying homes and they're planning on it, and that 40 million might have been moved around,
Yeah.
and so so I'm sure we could get an update from Eric.
Do you know the time frame on the Lakeview Parkway connection down on Geneva Road?
So for Lakeview Parkway, we're actually tonight, the council is looking to approve our agreement with the county. The county has agreed to move up our $14 million of funding by a few years. So it'll be a consent item tonight. They'll move forward $4 million now, and then $10 million for 24. And we should, with the thought that we can construct next summer. It's pretty aggressive, considering that we have to get design and then right away purchased by then. It might be the following year. UDOT with Geneva Road widening project, they are programming and designing to widen Geneva Road to 5 lanes up to where you can kind of see where Lakeview Parkway sweeps to the southwest. They will actually in their project build the intersection and then tie back down to Geneva Road with a 3-lane facility. But their desire would be to construct their 5-lane facility at the same time that we do Lakeview Parkway. They're planning on, we just had the plan in hand meeting yesterday. They're looking to have their environmental clearance probably in a few weeks, which would mean for them that once they have environmental clearance, they can go out and start talking to property owners and purchase property. And their thought is for their project, they would be ready to advertise next winter. But they're looking at trying to build their roadway and ours all at the same time. So it might be pushed to 25 if we can get our right-of-way purchased. It seems to be the biggest hang-up or the most, how do I want to put this, most important critical path is purchasing right-of-way and going through that process of negotiating and agreeing on a price and then moving forward. So hopefully we can start building that next year for 24 with the church in their open house. I think is going to happen this fall. But it might be till 25 if we do that. We also have another project too. It kind of shows there on Center Street between I-15 and Geneva Road. We've had that on our list to do as a project, but we've been waiting for the spur line to be abandoned. I think that's going to be abandoned in 26 from what Vineyard was telling me. 26, somewhere in there. Seems to always go out another year every time I talk to Vineyard, but that's what we're waiting for, is for that spur line to be abandoned, and we can at least widen that portion of Center Street, get those folks in Vineyard up through and get into the freeway or up through Center Street, because we know it's kind of a choke point right there. And then when that happens too, when that spur line's abandoned, then Geneva Road's going to be, UDOT will have quite a few projects on there. They'll straighten out 4th North and Geneva Road just over here, as well as they'll do some intersection improvements at 16th North and 8th North and try and mitigate some of those other congestion things that they have on Geneva Road.
Sounds like you want that cost sheet.
It'd be interesting
I
to
mean,
see.
it's in the
Might-
master, it's in the master plan.
Yeah,
but
I'm sure it is.
We can pull it out, and I don't know if we can distribute it to this group. So.
There's a lot of money.
But yeah, the magnitude of what we're looking at just right here is hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yes.
So on a project like 8 South, I'm just, where it says go to 5 lanes, there would have to be a lot of coordination with Provo City, I'm sure, to take it all the way to University Avenue.
And that would likely be a MAG project too, I would think, just because of its regional significance. That one, and likely the Main Street one there south of Parkway, that's been getting a little bit more traction with MAG as they've been modeling the lake crossing there at our 2000 South and looking at other means of getting to Parkway and things like that. So I would think both of those, they probably have a pretty good argument to get those, some of that funding from MAG. But to your point, Chris, you're still looking at tens of millions of dollars that we would have to do. And likely for those projects, it would be how we had approached 16th North in its infancy, when we would ask MAG for $5 million every funding cycle to purchase property, and that way the city could afford the 6.7% match, and we'd be looking at a 10-15 year process to purchase homes and then at some point build it.
But you got a choke point at Will's Pit Stop, you got the river bridge, the roundabout. And the fact it's green, we can use this document to lobby MAG to put 8 South in the RTP so that it's only 7% match. And so this is where we would sit down with MAG and say, hey, 8 South is a regional road, let's put that on your RTP, it's on our RTMP, and get MAG to move that into a regional road, and then therefore it would change from green to blue, and Orem would be on the hook for 7% instead of 100%.
And when you take a look at this, this planning and everything, are you also taking a look at infrastructure, maintenance? So you're only tearing up the road one time?
Yes. Yeah, we would. We do that every year during our budget season. We coordinate with the utilities and our streets group, and then we make sure that we don't do things twice in a short amount of time.
Yeah, you can adjust the priority based on water, sewer, gas.
Yeah.
Whatever's in the roadway. Those are all considered.
Okay.
Is there still any thought of having an interchange at 8 South and the freeway? Some kind of a limited interchange, or?
Yeah, and some of the recent modeling, and then just speaking with some of the previous administration, the thought would be that would be just an overpass. We wouldn't actually have a freeway connection, it would just be an 8 South overpass. We have in years past as well looked at having an overpass at 12th North as well. Sometimes those become a little bit political, and they're on the master plan and then they're off. And that's part of the reason why we've looked at, looking at some of our criteria, so we don't have projects that appear and then disappear. Let's look at our criteria, and that's where we looked at levels of service and desires for maybe not 7-lane facilities, but 5-lane facilities, as well as exploring other modes. How can we encourage transit? What can we do for active transportation and things like that? And I guess to clarify too, Reed made a good point. MAG is the Mountain Land Association of Governments. They're our regional metropolitan planning organization, and they are a pseudo-governmental agency that is paid for by all the cities in this county, and they are the keeper of state and federal and county tax dollars that are appropriated for transportation needs. So they usually get every 2 years. We have a funding cycle, and we go through and we identify projects. We go through a selection process, and then they're awarded. And every 2 years, they have about anywhere from $80 to $100 million worth of funds. And all of the communities in this county will go ahead and go to their transportation master plans, look at these previously adopted RTP, and then they bring these projects forward either in a phased approach or the whole project like we did for Lakeview Parkway. And then we essentially start out with maybe 100 projects, and it gets whittled down to maybe 30 or 40, but we essentially compete amongst one another for this funding, and then it gets approved, and then we're on the list, and then in anywhere from 3 to 4 years, that money is available, and then we move forward with those projects. So that's typically the cycle we have for some of these larger mag-funded projects. And to what John was saying, when they're mag-funded, they're usually, the city or the county, whoever it is who's applying, has a 6.7% match, and then MAG with their state, federal, or county dollars picks up the remaining amount. So that's how we can do some of these large projects.
How many of these projects are MAG eligible, are regionally significant?
It'd be all those ones that are blue, so a majority of those are gonna be MAG funded. With just speaking to John, they're the ones that we would have to go in and lobby would be 8 South and Main Street. At least the piece of 8 South that is east of 8 East. It might be a harder sell for that little piece between Main Street and Orem Boulevard.
Do the costs in the master plan identify these are MAG projects, and the city would be expected to come up with X number of dollars?
Some of them are, yeah. Some of them I think the ones that are MAG eligible, we've identified those as far as we can. Right now, our crystal ball is shot out the window because of inflation and whatnot, so it's kind of hard to predict how much it's going to cost. But for some of the other ones, like on that previous map that showed just intersection improvements, we've looked at those, and even though it's been identified with that yellow cross, we've identified, hey, it would help level of service here if we were to put in a right turn lane, and we've kind of shine that ball up as much as we can to get us a cost, and then we look at things and identify. A lot of this is an unfunded project list, even though we do have some county sales tax that we do acquire, but we also use those for some of our roadway projects too. So.
When you say unfunded, meaning we have to fund it ourselves, and we typically haven't used our gas tax or our 24.
Yeah.
Those are dedicated for continued road maintenance, local roads and arterials and collectors. But
Right.
others,
Yeah, so we don't necessarily, for these projects, we don't have a transportation fee similar to when you have your sewer base rate, your water rate, and things like that. You develop your master plan off of the revenue that is generated, so you can account for what you're gonna do with those dollars. These aren't necessarily, this is growth, and these are projects, and we bring them to the powers that be to help us decide what's the priority gonna be, because typically, on that other sheet where we had all those intersection projects, if we happen to be doing a project near there, right now, currently, for example, we have our water tank project, and we happen to know that 4 South and 4th West is in need of an intersection improvement there. So we're gonna go ahead and seize that opportunity, and we're gonna be putting in a signal there. Probably a little bit sooner than we thought, but with all that construction activity with the pedestrians, we just thought now is a good time to go ahead and move that project up in priority and put a signal there. As well as we're looking at other intersections as well. But our plan is pretty fluid. It kind of depends on complaint base, accident base, and then we look at our demands, and then we just look at how much money we have.
This is basically a list or map to say, this is what we think is needed. Where do we want to put our energy into these? What's near term, what's far term? And so where does the city want to put their energy in to kick out some of these projects? And some go away, some get built. The 8th South crossing over the freeway is on there. UVU and MAG and city are all deciding, do we really want a crossing over into the transit center? Do we need it? Do we have to move those apartments? UVU doesn't want to give up any land, so that may go away, it may not. It says it's needed now, but that was part of the original BRT loop, was going to go up there. But this is basically an idea of where does Orem want to put their energy and funding in, because not all of it can be funded is what Sam means. Is it? So.
Thanks, John.
At our time, yeah.
Appreciate the input.
Just speaking to inflation here, so the interchange at University Parkway and the freeway, I think it was around 18 to $19 million when that went in back in about 2000-ish. Yeah. And to put things into perspective, the pedestrian bridge costs more than that. That just went in a couple years ago.
We had 3 interchanges to put in for UDOT at 130 million total, and now they're about 90 million each. And that was 2 years apart. That was from 2020 to 2022.
More than doubled in 2 years?
So we now budget for Fillmore, we're looking at an interchange for $90 million. It's just crazy. It's not even inflation, it's just the construction costs, you know. It's just...
Any other questions or comments, or how does PWAC feel about endorsing this transportation master plan before it goes to the city council meeting?
I mean, why not?
You would like an endorsement and say, so you could go to council and say, we've met with these different committees, TAC, PWAC, and so forth. Maybe we should make a motion.
Yeah, do we have a motion to accept this? Move it forward? You have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Say aye.
Is the full copy available on the website or
I
not
can
yet?
send you guys a draft if you'd like.
Okay.
You guys are having a hard time sleeping at night.
If you could send us a link or
Yeah,
an
link would
email,
be
that would be great.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thanks again, John.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks.
Chris?
We do need to set a date for our next meeting. Coming up next month. There may be some challenges with, I don't know, spring break or other activities that you all have, so just wanted to coordinate on that. Let's see.
Let's see, spring break is the first week in April.
Yeah. So we'd be looking at about April 18th-ish, or
I'll be gone both of those days.
18th, 11th. Read WEAU is the week of the 24th, right?
So,
Yeah, we'll be gone that week.
yeah.
Okay, the 11th or the 18th?
Either one works for me.
Will work for me.
If I can get Todd to handle it for me.
On the 18th?
18th or the 11th.
Okay.
Let's set a date now, the 18th then?
Yeah.
Okay.
I knew we were missing somebody. It was Todd.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in April, if you can just put Todd down for,
I'll let him know.
thanks.
Sam, if you could get that to us, then we can disseminate to the committee, and we'll send that when we send the minutes for this meeting.
Sounds good. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Moved.
Okay. All in favor? Say aye. Okay, thanks everybody. Appreciate everybody attending.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Did you see the, what was it, about 2 weeks ago, the lawsuit that was occurring with Pleasant Grove and regarding their transportation utility fund? It failed, so they were able to do it. It was between Libertas and